Greetings, everyone. Jill Robinson here, and welcome to TRG 30. TRG 30, where every time we're together, we talk about bold change required for our sector's resilience, recovery past this pandemic and into our future that in this year is absolutely going to be about sales. They are coming in 2021, but only relative, we think, to how well we're activating to make that happen. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. As always, I want to cue you up to listen for some things, specific things. First, change. So we will be talking about specific strategies and tactics. Where might your campaign, if it's already launched or is considering being launched soon, where might you be able to make some changes that are additive? Second, collaboration. This pandemic time has put us in Zoom rooms. It has flattened our hierarchy. It has, because of staff changes, furloughs and layoffs, we are working with team members in new ways. How are you in your organization doing this? And if you're not too far down that path, this sales cycle represents an opportunity to get some practice as you consider working between marketing, development, front of house, and box office. And always action. Action for 2021. Make commitments now. Get your pencils and paper out. You'll need it today to create the change that you want to see. So first, the good news. In-person is indeed coming back. In a report we published in January, something we call our COVID comeback report, where we survey administrators, global administrators, about their intention to return, their intention to use digital. We found in January that 85% of Canadian organizations and 98% of US organizations were planning for live performance either in their primary venue or outdoors by the end of 2021. So those of you in the UK, we don't have your data here because at the time we were fielding the research, there was new restrictions that had just gone into place. And now, since then, there have been announcements about the schemes the government in the UK has to make live performance part of the reopening strategy in June. And just today we've learned about additional resources being made available to you to tide you over and get you ready to launch. Lots to celebrate, right? I feel it. I don't know if you do, but I feel this change coming. And I can't wait for live performance to become part of our normal lives again in the best of ways, reliably, and in ways that inspire us because of the creativity and diversity and everything, all the energy that you all are planning. These days are the beginning of a crescendo to our new future. And so now we need to be thinking about not just philanthropy, as we've been talking about in our past TRG 30s, but sales. And it means that we need to start thinking about campaigns. It's been nearly a year since we've aggressively and robustly and enthusiastically gone to market with subscription or single ticket or membership campaigns. So much has changed. So today, we're going to introduce four verbs really, that every sales campaign should consider this year. And these are them: segment, empathize, simplify, and experiment. Today, we're going to dive into two. There are a lot of mechanics in these steps, and we want to give ourselves and you time to talk them through, work them out a little bit. So to do that, we've divided this Reignite session into two. 2 weeks from now, we'll dive into simplify and experiment. But today, we're going to start with number one. Segmentation. Now, segmentation is something that you marketers in the room and development officers are familiar with, but new segmentation is what we're talking about today. So what do I mean? This year, and hopefully always, we've got to align our segmentation with patron realities. This won't be like we've always done it. Patron realities are more complex than just transactional behavior, but of course that's going to be important. So let's consider some of the segments and new segments that are likely in the databases in this room today. Start with this one. The influx of patrons whose first engagement with your organization was as a donation. They responded to your call for support. They care about arts and culture, and they gave. There's a segment in your database who's new to you this year that way. There are subscribers or members with money on account or credit. And within that segment, there are first-time and multi-year subscribers or members. They will think, feel, approach your invitation differently. There are ticket bookers who donated tickets back, lots of them all over the world. There are sustaining major givers and donors, not just in the US, but in the UK, Canada, Australia. Philanthropy played a really important role in sustaining your organization last year. They are going to think and feel yet differently from the above as you consider sales invitations. And finally, you've got some information about return propensity, how interested people are in actually returning. And what information do you know about age and generational cohort? We now have 5, 6 generational cohorts that are buying tickets, engaging with the arts. They don't respond to crisis in the same way. They don't respond to marketing channels in the same way. What do you know about this in your own data? And yes, this deck will be available after. We'll send it in an email to you all. Okay, so to do this right and well, collaboration is going to absolutely be required to ensure that your organization is aligned from a comms perspective and that you're doing this in the most smart, most strong way. So for example, there may be development patrons who are typically managed by development or education that should actually take the lead in thinking or implementation around a sales campaign. We may need to take different approaches based on the information we've gained over the past 12 months. So does your philanthropic or development department know of donors who have stopped responding to emails? They're just sick of them. Okay, great. So let's reintroduce them to what you're up to with a letter, direct mail. Maybe there are education segments like school parents who are uber responsive to email. You can manage that too. Give them a simple email with a clear call to action. The point here is that when you consider segments heading into this year, consider it together as an ensemble. Your approach will be more effective, it will be stronger. So let's think for a minute about what that means from a mechanical point of view. If you're in the marketing department, first, and this is where you'll want to take your pencils out because I don't have words that are going to pop up on this tile. So the mechanics of this, if you're in the marketing department, you might take a first stab at your organizational segmentation, starting perhaps with ticketing, what you know about ticketing. But within your team or on your own, also consider what are the other organizational segments that might want to be considered as you're approaching a season ticket campaign or a multi-buyer campaign or a membership campaign. Put those other segments on a list. Then second, invite those leaders or members who can participate well from other departments to a segment planning session where you can talk to each other about what you're thinking from a sales point of view. Get alignment and agreement either in advance or maybe after you'll need to do it about where the biggest opportunities are. You're not going to be able to run a 126 segment campaign likely. On your limited likely staff, but where is the biggest opportunity from a volume point of view, from a potential income point of view, from a mission point of view? Get alignment about what segments are the highest priority and do the math and then create your plan. So you have a list of top 10 segments. You know how many there are, what the income potential is from those segments, what the invitation is likely to be, what the offer is. as an organization, you've come together to create a sales segment plan. And it's also another step in integrated campaign planning and behavior. Okay, so first is segmentation. Next is this word empathy. Empathy. So you're not starting from scratch here as it relates to empathy, but what we're talking about now is using something called design theory or design thinking that you may have had exposure to, you may use in your graphic design approach. Let's step back and take this approach as we're thinking about sales campaigns, which means we start with the patron, with the segment in mind, putting ourselves in the shoes of that segment and asking, what do they need? What do they need? And what problems might they be facing as they approach the invitation or the season that we're advancing? What solutions might you have to those problems, and how might you prototype and test some of those solutions so that you can address them and see if it's really working? So let's just play this out for a minute. Let's imagine and put yourself in the shoes of your oldest patrons. Empathize with them. See if you can imagine how they might be feeling as they approach coming back to live performance, indoor, outdoor. Feel their needs. Then you try to define their potential problems, ideate several ways to solve them, and then you try it. And yes, I said try it. And if you're doing something really different, you're going to want to see if you can test a segment or two first. And this is not about wasting time, especially with limited staff, as we're going to talk about this test and learn framework, this experimentation framework we're going to talk about in 2 weeks because we think it's that important. But really, testing and learning is less about risk and much more about listening. Scaling your listening. I've said repeatedly, this is a new muscle that we must develop. One of our team members here called it, rather than test and learn, Jill, it's call and response, which I love. Call and response. We've got to develop our organizational capacity to invite and listen to see if that invitation was accepted and what the parameters of that conversation are about. Another example, you might have patrons whom you know on a proportional basis are facing financial challenges greater this year than in prior years. So how might this design thinking approach help you deliver sales invitations that work for them? Empathy. So stepping into their shoes, these are the steps that we want to encourage you to take and provoke you to make into action. So writing a list of realities and values for each of your segments. If you have existing survey data here, use it. Identify the problems you're trying to solve or the opportunities you're trying to create for each segment. Each segment, the answers are not going to be the same for each part of your database, and then ideate for the ways to solve it and test it. Now, heads up here a little bit about this word empathy beyond this design thinking framework or as a support for this design thinking framework. Empathy is a strength. Now, that may sound, you may cock your head a little bit about that coming from TRG wonky organization, but we at TRG use strengths finders regularly with ourselves and our clients. And empathy, people who have empathy as a strength, feel on behalf and with others in very different ways than people like I do who don't have empathy. It doesn't mean that I don't care about my friends and family and my colleagues and you, but it does mean that people who have that strength can see things that I have blind spots around. And I can recall in my performing arts career, you likely have these people in your organizations, Jill, that front of house manager, who can never stop talking about how we've made important patrons angry because of a decision. And sometimes we want to sideline Jill because she's always whining about patrons. Now is the time to make sure you understand in your organization who has that ability to empathize with your patrons and put that person front and center. Leverage that skill so that you don't have blind spots. This is just one step of the collaboration that will be required as you consider this design theory approach in your sales campaigns. So your broadened perspectives can consider strengths, but it also should consider departments. And when we think about patrons, it's not just development and marketing and front of house that have an impact on patrons. It's outreach and education. It's programming. Everyone has a role in stewarding patrons, and this year, everyone has a vested interest in doing this patron thing really right and well. Okay, so let's start talking about some of those mechanics, and I've got a little bit of an activity I want it to engage in with you in real time. So first, the mechanics. This may feel somewhat similar, but we need to first get a fix on our most critical segments. Pick 2 or 3 to start, not all 10. What are the most important segments you'd start with first? And then gather team members from across your organization and go through the steps in this design thinking recommendation that we've advanced here. And you may, as you think about bringing people into a room, to avoid a free-for-all, you're going to need some kind of plan or facilitator. Maybe you've got that strength in someone on your team. Maybe you need to find someone from the outside, but you need good process so that people can participate meaningfully and well. And maybe you can start with a straw man that folks can react to. But the end goal is to think with the patron in mind and create your sales campaign with these design thinking steps in mind. So I want to do this together with you. Let's go back to these steps. Get prepared to talk to me in chat here. Let's take, for example, a first-time subscriber who subscribed for the first time for the pandemic season of 2021. For UK, think multi-buyers or season ticket bookers. And let's imagine that this first-time subscriber, multi-buyer, was generous, and they responded to your call for support, and they donated. So it was their first time, and they donated that investment that they thought, those experiences they thought they were going to have. Take a moment. Think about how this patron is going to feel when you talk to them about the 21-22 season. Put yourselves in their shoes for a moment. And right now, in chat, right now, start to describe to your peers about how you think new first-time subscribers are going to feel when they have donated that to you and you're inviting them to recommit for 21-22. How are they going to feel? Let me see what you think. Right, wait and see. Maybe action. Right, they might feel like they need a discount. Skeptical. We want to thank them. That's right. They didn't get to experience this art form, right? They need to be recognized. Where did my money go? Right, maybe they're disengaged from the quality. We want to make them feel special, worried that their benefits won't be provided. Look at all of this uncertainty and these actions that you all are saying, boy, we better include these actions in our campaigns. So you're a big group of people. You're not going to have 100 and 200 people in a room, but you're beginning to see how yourselves, how you're imagining when you put this empathetic head on. And your plan is going to need to reflect some of these thoughts. including, I'm happy to be given an offer to participate. So you can imagine if that's how you want your patrons to feel, if that's how you want patrons to feel, that they were happy to be given an offer, what is it in your communications that you would need to say? And how many versions of this, 3, 5, not 25, might you test to see what gets the best response? That's where the call and response comes into play. That's why we want you to be thinking about trying, because it starts a conversation. Okay, design thinking, design theory. So there are 4 things that campaigns have to do. We have to consider new segmentation, yes, based on transactional behavior, but also based on all of these things that we know through surveys, or that we imagine we might have to respond to. So there are segments out there that are not in CRM systems that we might have to respond to. And how much ahead of that are we going to be this year? Second is that we need to be rooted in empathy. And you will benefit from your team members who have that as a skill. Next time in 2 weeks, we'll talk about simplifying, really interesting and good data about how we must get better at simplifying the way that we invite our websites and more, and this call and response, experimentation, the laboratory of listening. Always, we have our benchmark. It's free, it's growing. It's so the context and background you would have for campaigns, if you're participating in it, I urge you to sign up. We are always here for short and longer ways that we can help reinforce and infrastructure these kinds of campaigns. And now, Stephen, we're going to take questions. I look forward to it. Let's go.
I love one of the last statements there, which is, wow, I didn't think of that. Like, the point of this exercise is to get these diverse, empathetic viewpoints around the table. And I know not all of you saw all of the comments there, because some of them were just to us as the panelists, but thank you to everyone. There's so many great thoughts in there.
We could share them, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Jill, as questions come in Q&A button, I'm full of what if questions here. And I'm wondering, there might be so many ideas around the table here that could stall us right into not taking action. So I just wonder how, with these empathetic viewpoints, to get us beyond that first stage, how we get to the next step, right? What's needed to get beyond those thoughts?
Well, so let's answer this together. But I think what you're saying is there are so many what if scenarios, it's overwhelming. Right? That's what you're saying? Right. And there are more segments than you can imagine responding to. There's more than we are going to be able to do. So we have to allow brainstorming to happen. My own instinct would, if I ran a department, would be to allow the brainstorming to happen and then find a way to say, okay, really, not only how many, like we said in the segmentation bit, what's the volume and what's the potential impact, but around these what if scenarios, let's get a gut. Let's get some anecdata here. How many of us feel like, voting? How many of us feel like this is going to be a real issue? And just start to get a sense of where the biggest issues are in the room. I've cited a couple of them. You are going to have to deal with aging patrons. I'm confident about it. You're going to have to deal with patrons whose finances have changed dramatically. So there's a couple of scenarios where you're going to want to consider in your comms and in your reactions what your answers will be. You
referenced there the patrons with financial challenges, and there's a question here around how will we know, right, through data, that patrons have financial challenges. Right. That's very individual to a person. And in fact, as is consumer sentiment right now about the propensity to return. Yes, we might have survey data, but we might not be able to append that to a record. Right. How do we account for those different scenarios?
Right. Well, I think the answer isn't to say, hey, check here if you've got financial problems, and then we'll, I think the answer is to to plan out what your response will be. So if you distribute sales offers based on what you do know, but you have a plan for reaction, if you hear from someone who says, look, I donated that ticket because I could then and I can't now, and this is why I'm not renewing, then you stand ready with, okay, here's how we'd like to invite you, payment plans, whatever it is that you can do.
Douglas asks here around how many people to have around the table, right? We have there often some of these opinions can come from personal opinions rather than real world data. And I think there's something uniquely here about what people with a strength of empathy can provide around the table that allows a viewpoint that's different to a personal opinion, right? But I'm just wondering how we account for those different viewpoints around the table.
Well, it's imperfect, Douglas. I mean, you know that too. So there's a little bit of judgment here. I was just reading an article about how we futurecast when we can't use past data as a predictor, and the role of creativity and enabling people to contribute, and then we've got to make judgments. So, you're going to know when you get people engaged by the heat in the room. There may be external data that helps you get a sense and a fix on how big of an issue this is in your city or where your patrons come from. So my answer, Stephen, I don't know if you would contribute but my answer is imperfect. And to how many people in the room, you can't manage a room of 20. Can you manage a room of 10? It depends on the process. I manage a room of 10, but I think it depends a lot on your culture. So I'm sorry for that. It's not.
Well, I think your point earlier on is who might not normally be around the table that can contribute.
Yeah.
Chad asks around thoughts about reaching out to these segments before the sales pitch. There's a lot of surveys being undertaken right now, both individually and wider. Should we be engaging and asking questions before we go out with these campaigns?
Yeah, I think so. I saw Sebastian ask that question too. Do we start by speaking to a couple, 3 of them? Yes. And so this question of how we actually test, if I were doing it and if I had the time, I would put my box office or patron services staff up to some outbound calls or surveys. I might say, I'm going to test 50 households from my 3 most important segments. And I'm going to test a couple different versions of an offer or invitation, and I'm going to see what comes back. And then I can launch with that data to the broader campaign. So, I talked to a client recently who's in this room who said, man, I don't know how we have the time to do this. It's a trick, right? But if we think about call and response, not think about listening, then let's get clever about how we listen.
Jill, we're almost at time. And so I wonder, just a quick from Michael, digital only first time patrons from different geographies.
Yeah. Oh, God.
In a different region or country.
Right.
There's an opportunity, and yet.
Right.
How are we going to orient ourselves with these patrons in the future?
Right. I just was dealing with this with a client, and the question I asked was, what is your digital plan?
Yeah.
I believe before the pandemic, we had a need to extend the ability of our organizations to connect with boomers who are aging. And digital provides us a way to do that. So that was before the pandemic, and now we've got all this other. So I think it's a strategic question about what is our digital strategy, and that is an episode for another time. It's a very strategically important question. So it's a great seed for a future session.
Well, we'll get to the next 2 in 2 weeks' time. So thank you to everyone for being here for this 30 minutes today. Lots of questions about, you might need to watch this again, right? All of our past TRG 30s are on our website at trgarts.com. Just click TRG 30 at the top, but we will send out a copy of that tomorrow, and you'll get that in your inbox and you can share that with your team. So thanks for being with us. Thanks for contributing, and we'll look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time.
Thanks.
Bye, Jill.